The year is 1945. The war in Europe is over, but peace has not yet arrived. Berlin, once the proud capital of the Third Reich, is now a city of ruins, its buildings gutted, streets choked with rubble. Survivors emerge from cellars, exhausted and hungry, scavenging for anything to keep them alive. The infrastructure has collapsed. No electricity, no water, no government. Into this vacuum stepped the Allied forces, tasked with rebuilding from the ground up. The initial elation of victory quickly gave way to the sobering reality of the task ahead. General George S. Patton, famed for his battlefield brilliance, now faced a new kind of war. The fate of post-war Germany and Europe hung in the balance. General George S. Patton Jr. was a warrior forged in battle, renowned for his aggressive tactics and relentless drive. He had led the Third Army across France with audacious speed, breaking sieges and smashing German divisions. Patton respected military professionalism, even in his enemies, and saw the German officer corps as skilled soldiers, not irredeemable monsters. Now, with the fighting over, Patton was assigned a new role, military governor of Bavaria. This was not a battlefield, but a shattered society in desperate need of order. There were no tanks to command, only chaos, starvation, and disease to confront. The systems that kept society running, sanitation, food, water, had collapsed. Patton, the master of maneuver warfare, now had to figure out how to get the lights back on and the water flowing. His respect for German expertise would soon collide with the Allied policy of denazification. The enemy was no longer a uniformed army, but the chaos of a broken world. Patton's greatest challenge would not be fought with guns, but with decisions that would define the future of Germany. The war was over, but the hardest battle was just beginning. Patton was about to discover that rebuilding a nation could be even more complicated than conquering one. When Patton took command of Bavaria, he found a society on the brink of collapse. Millions of desperate civilians and refugees filled the streets as starvation and disease loomed. Infrastructure was shattered, and the Nazi collapse left no one to run basic services. Most skilled administrators had Nazi ties, often out of necessity. Allied policy demanded their removal, but Patton saw this as dangerous. He argued survival came first. Restoring order required German experts, whatever their past. For Patton, the choice was clear: survival over ideology, no matter the cost. Faced with collapse, Patton chose pragmatism over ideological purity. He argued to his superiors and the press that absolute denazification was unworkable. Engineers, bureaucrats, and managers, all essential to rebuilding, had Nazi affiliations. Patton insisted keeping them in place was a necessary evil to stave off disaster. He believed they could be monitored, their expertise used without granting them real power. Once order was restored, non-Nazi replacements could be found. But in the autumn of 1945, survival was the only priority. Patton's frustration boiled over in a press conference, where he compared the Nazi Party to American political parties. The comment was a public relations disaster, seeming to trivialize Nazi crimes. Headlines accused Patton of coddling Nazis, and his critics seized the moment. The general who had conquered armies was now losing the battle for public opinion. As Patton struggled with denazification, his focus shifted to a new threat, the Soviet Union. He saw Europe not at peace, but divided, with the Red Army occupying much of the continent. Patton mistrusted Stalin and saw Soviet expansion as a direct threat to the West. He believed a strong rebuilt Germany was needed as a bulwark against communism. Dismantling German industry and purging its administrators, he argued, was dangerously short-sighted. Patton even suggested the real war should have been against the Soviets. His anti-Soviet stance made his resistance to denazification even more urgent. He wanted experienced Germans in place to help resist future Soviet aggression. Patton's blunt pronouncements alarmed his superiors and threatened Allied unity. His vision for post-war Europe was radical and increasingly out of step with official policy. The backlash from Patton's press conference was swift. His comparison of the Nazi Party to American parties sparked outrage in the U.S. Eisenhower, under immense pressure, summoned Patton for a difficult meeting. Patton's public statements had made his position untenable. With reluctance, Eisenhower relieved Patton of his command in Bavaria. For America's most celebrated battlefield commander, it was a stunning downfall. Patton was reassigned to a desk job, writing the official history of the war. He felt betrayed and misunderstood, convinced history would vindicate him. His removal sent a clear message: there would be no tolerance for pragmatic denazification. Political principle had triumphed over administrative necessity. Just months later, Patton's life ended abruptly after a car accident. He died not in battle, but in controversy, leaving behind a legacy of brilliance and debate. With Patton gone, General Lucian Truscott took command in Bavaria. Truscott enforced denazification to the letter, purging tens of thousands of officials with any Nazi ties. The systems Patton had kept running with experienced personnel began to fail. New administrators, though politically clean, often lacked the skills to manage complex urban systems. As winter set in, food distribution faltered, coal supplies dwindled, and sanitation broke down. The humanitarian crisis Patton had feared became reality. The rigid policy, while morally understandable, had devastating effects on ordinary Germans. American soldiers found themselves enforcing a policy that worsened life for those they governed. The lesson was bitter, inflexible rules can have unintended consequences. Ultimately, the strict policy proved unsustainable. Within a year, many fired professionals were quietly rehired. In the end, Patton's controversial argument was quietly vindicated. The need to make society function outweighed the desire for absolute purity. Patton's dilemma in Bavaria reveals a deep moral contradiction at the heart of post-war reconstruction. How do you rebuild a nation when only those tainted by the old regime know how to run it? Patton argued for separating professional expertise from political ideology, a pragmatic but risky solution. The line between using an expert and empowering a former oppressor is perilously thin. For victims of the Nazi regime, seeing former Nazis in power felt like a betrayal. The rapid shift to the Cold War meant confronting the Nazi past was often set aside for new geopolitical realities. West Germany's economic miracle was built, in part, on the expertise of men with troubling pasts. Patton's post-war battle leaves us with questions that have no easy answers. Was his approach necessary realpolitik or a moral failure? The choices of 1945 left scars on Europe and shaped the early Cold War. The end of war is never the end of struggle. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought in the ruins, long after the guns fall silent.